technical issues we now have worked out. Today we'll be discussing procurement fundamentals and how to do business with the City of Chicago. My name is Courtney Del Judas, and I'll be going through the presentation for you. I'm an attorney in the Department of Procurement Services. So to give you an overview of what we'll be talking about today, we're going to start with just an overview of DPS, and then we'll go into some of the laws that govern the procurement processes. We'll talk about some key procurement terms, different types of procurement. We'll talk about the certification process if you'd like to become a certified firm. We'll talk about contract monitoring and compliance. We'll touch on programs and bid incentives, and then we'll finish with talking about how you can maximize the use of the DPS website to get additional information about the procurement process. And then we'll close with any questions you might have about the presentation. So just to start, DPS is the contracting authority for the City of Chicago, responsible for procuring goods and services for the city. And we work together as a team with our customers to guarantee an open, fair, and timely process. And we do this by establishing, communicating, and enforcing superior business practices. To help give a little context for the department, we're going to talk about a couple of the key laws that govern the procurement process. If you're looking for which laws govern the process, there are two main laws you want to keep in mind. The first is the Municipal Purchasing Act, and the second is the Municipal Code of Chicago. And these kind of work together. So the Municipal Purchasing Act is the state statute that governs the city's procurement practices. This is where you'll find kind of the broad strokes of the requirements for the procurement process. And then if you're looking for the more specific information that governs the city's procurement, if you go into the Municipal Code into Chapter 2-92, you'll find all the city ordinances that govern the procurement process. Also want to make sure in terms of introduction, we talk about a few key terms you'll hear me use throughout this presentation. The first being bid package. And this is the set of documents that the city issues to solicit bids for goods and services. The bid packages are now all provided electronically through the city's e-procurement system, so you no longer need to get paper bid packages from the city. And another term we'll use is an addendum, and an addendum refers to any change to the city's requirements, whether that be in an invitation to bid, request for qualification, or a request for proposals. All addenda are ultimately uploaded to our e-procurement system, so they're all available online. And if you're registered for a particular solicitation or you've submitted a response already for a solicitation and an addendum gets issued, you will automatically get a notification that a new addenda has been issued for that specification. Another term is a contract, and this is just any written agreement between the city and a vendor to provide goods and or services for the city. And there are a number of different forms these contracts take. You'll hear us talk about the different forms when we talk about the different types of procurement next. And the last term we wanted to go over is just amendment or modification. And this is any document that formally changes the terms and conditions of the contract. And there are several different forms of amendments and or modifications. One of the most common forms is a change order that we do in construction contracts, but anything you get in writing from the city that's formally changing the terms and conditions, we'd consider an amendment or modification. Now, going into the different types of procurement, in DPS, we are kind of broken up into two main sections. We have our contract administration side and our contracting equity side. So first, we're going to talk about more of the contract administration side as we go through the different types of procurement. So there are 5 main types. They are small orders, competitive bids, job order contracts or JOC contracts, requests for proposals or RFPs, and requests for qualifications or RFQs. So the first procurement type is a small order, and this is the least formal of the city's procurement processes. This is used to procure any goods or services that are under $250,000. And the main distinction between small orders and other competitive bids that we'll talk about later are small orders do not receive formal advertisement. So you won't see these advertised in the newspaper. However, you can access these at any time on iSupplier. They are available for anyone to bid upon. And for any small order that is over $10,000, it will be considered for MBE and WBE goals. Closely related to small orders, we have our formal competitive bids. And just like small orders, these are awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, but these are for procuring goods and services that are over $250,000. So I had mentioned that small orders are not advertised formally. Competitive bids are all formally advertised. And we advertise in the Chicago Tribune as well as the daily and the classified section. Similar to small orders, if you prefer, you can also see the advertisement always online, and they are always available on our eProcurement website. You'll want to look as soon as you see a competitive bid that you would like to bid upon. One of the things you'll want to look at is the bid solicitation period. The length of the bid solicitation period will vary by solicitation, but they average between 10 and 30 calendar days in which they're advertised. And that is the time span you have to submit your bid for that particular specification. Another thing to pay attention to when you're looking at competitive bids is whether there is a pre-bid meeting. And if there is a pre-bid meeting, you want to look at if that is optional or mandatory. If you see that you're bidding on a specification where the pre-bid meeting is mandatory, if you do not attend the pre-bid meeting, your bid will be considered non-responsive, which means you won't be able to be considered for that particular competitive bid. So always want to make sure that you check for the pre-bid meeting, and if it's mandatory, you attend. But if you see a pre-bid meeting and you see that it's optional, even though you do not need to attend to be considered responsive, we highly encourage you to attend those meetings. There's a lot of information that can help you through the bidding process. During the pre-bid meeting, there's a review of the specification, and there's a chance for any concerns about the specification to be addressed. There's also a chance for a question and answer period. So if you go in with particular questions, you can get them answered, or you might even just hear a different question that you didn't know you had, and you might hear a response to it that helps you respond on the specification. So we always highly encourage you to attend pre-bid meetings when we have them. And depending on what occurs at the pre-bid meeting, there may be an addendum or a clarification issued regarding the bid documents. If that is issued, they will all be uploaded onto iSupplier. And if you've already submitted your response to the bid, you'll get a notification that an addendum has been issued. Now, while we often do have pre-bid meetings on our competitive bids, there is not always a pre-bid meeting. If there is not a pre-bid meeting, we encourage you to make sure you're being even more proactive about reviewing the specification and making sure that you reach out to DPS, specifically to the procurement specialist who is listed on the cover page of the specification, with any questions you have about the specification. Usually there'll be a bid question deadline period, and that will be on the cover page as well. If you do see that, you want to make sure you submit any questions by that deadline, because if you submit it by the deadline, we will address the question, usually through an addendum or clarification if that's appropriate. But if you miss the deadline, you're not guaranteed you will get a response to that question. So definitely, especially if there's not a pre-bid meeting, make sure you're reaching out to that procurement specialist who's listed on the cover page of the specification as early as possible if you have any questions. Another thing you want to do when you're going through the bid documents for any specification you'd like to bid on is you really want to make sure that you read it carefully and make sure all required information is filled in, that anything that requires a signature is properly signed by someone with authority to sign that contract, and that if there is any signature, whether it be on the actual execution page or any affidavits that requires a notary, you want to make sure you notarize the documents. These are all frequent things we see, like either information not being filled in or improper signatures that result in bids being rejected. And we don't want anyone's bid to be rejected unnecessarily. So definitely make sure you're paying close attention, double check your bid documents before you submit your bid response. Then you'll also want to just make sure that if there is a bid bond or bid deposit that's required, you want to make sure you submit that with the bid as well, and that you submit it in the form that is required by the bid so that you're considered responsive. And while you're doing all of this, you just want to keep an eye on the bid submission date or the bid opening date. Because to be considered responsive, you do have to timely submit your bid, which means you do need to submit it before bid opening. A lot of the time, especially with there being an electronic system, we do have bidders who sometimes experience technical difficulties, especially their first couple times submitting bid responses. We do have an IT team that's available to answer your questions and help make sure you can get your bid on time. But because of the possible technical problems, we do recommend that you try to make sure that you are trying to submit your bid at least a few days before the bid opening date. That way, if you do run into any tech problems, we can make sure we can help you work out those problems well in advance of bid opening so your bid can be accepted on time. When it does get to the bid opening date, bid opening will occur at 11 a.m. Monday through Friday on whatever date is listed as the bid opening date on the cover page of your bid documents. And the bid opening occurs in the City Hall bid and bond room. This is located in room 103 in City Hall. It is also streamed online on YouTube if you'd like to watch it there. And during the bid opening, bids are opened and read aloud. They are then tabulated, and the bid tabulation and the bid documents are then reviewed for accuracy and completeness. About 24 hours after the bid opening, you'll be able to see the bid tabulation online on DPS's website as well. And following bid opening, there's a determination made regarding each bidder's responsiveness and responsibility for award. Because for competitive bids, ultimately we award to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And responsiveness essentially gets to whether you followed all the instructions, whether you completed everything as required by the bid documents. Responsibility gets more to whether you are an actual fit for that contract. So for instance, if you are bidding on a commercial real estate contract and you have only ever done residential work, it's possible that you would be deemed non-responsible for that particular bid. If that does happen, do want to stress that that would only be a determination for the particular, that one particular competitive bid. Every bid is evaluated separately. So if you ever are deemed non-responsive or non-responsible for a particular bid, that will not carry over to future solicitations. That will just be a determination for that one solicitation. But once the lowest responsive and responsible bidder is found for the particular competitive bid, the user department who issued that solicitation will make a recommendation of award to that particular bidder. And then those bids will be packaged along with all the required information, if there was a performance bond, any insurance requirements, and that will then route through the signature and approval process. And those documents will be countersigned by the city, and that will become your actual contract. For competitive bids, and this includes the small orders that we talked about right before, talking about the formal competitive bids, whatever you bid on becomes your contract. There is no negotiation process for competitive bidding. Our next procurement type is job order contracts or job contracts. This is another form of competitive bidding. In these are solely currently for the construction program. And in job contracts, there is firm fixed pricing. They are still competitively bid, but unlike the other competitive bid types we have talked about so far, which all have estimated quantities in the contracts, the quantities in these contracts are indefinite. And that's because these are designed for the city's small and medium-sized construction projects that are often repeated type of work in projects. So instead of having to develop plans and technical specifications for projects that the city regularly does and repeats, the city is only actually required to create the specifications once in the job order contract, and then can use that an indefinite amount of times up until the maximum compensation amount on the job contract. So when these go out for solicitation, general contractors are solicited to respond to a spec that has a unit price book. In that book, you'll see a description of a bunch of tasks, a unit of measure for that task, and a unit price for the task. As the bidder, you will then bid a variable that would be multiplied by that unit price. So if you bid 2, for instance, for a particular task, whatever that unit price is, if you're awarded the contract, you would multiply the unit price by 2, and that is what you would be paid for that particular task. Our next procurement type is requests for proposals, or RFPs. And so far, everything we've talked about has been awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. So low price has been the controlling factor. And in everything we've talked about as well, the scope has been set and there has been no negotiation process. That will change with this procurement type with the request for proposals. So we use this to receive proposals to implement new projects that often require professional services. And these are often used when the city doesn't have in-house technical experts or resources for particular projects or services. So in the RFP, you will see project objectives and a very broad scope of services. But unlike competitive bids where every detail of the scope of services is provided, the scope will be a fairly high level and not every detail about how the project will be implemented will be in the RFP. And the reason for that is that in your proposal that you submit in response to the RFP, you will actually explain how you will carry out the city's particular project. And when you submit the proposal, your proposal will then be rated by an evaluation committee for how well it fits the evaluation criteria for the city for that particular job. So every RFP will have the scope of services that you'll be replying to, but it will also have that set evaluation criteria that the evaluation committee will be using to evaluate your proposal. So you will know when you are submitting your proposal, what the evaluation committee will be looking for and what you need to include in your proposal, and also what will be rated, what will have the highest impact on your rating will be contained in the RFP. And ultimately, once the evaluation committee does rate every one of the proposals, an award will then be made to the highest rated and ranked respondent. And there is a negotiation period after the highest rated respondent is selected for the contract to ultimately be executed pursuant to the RFP. Then our final procurement type is requests for qualifications, or RFQs. This is a method used to solicit qualifications from companies who possess a high degree of technical expertise and knowledge in specific disciplines. So every type of procurement we've talked about up to this point has had a set scope of services. While the degree of specificity has varied, there's always been a scope. In requests for qualifications, that's not actually the case. Instead, the city will pre-qualify companies to build out a vendor pool to respond to future task orders. And those future task orders will contain the information about each individual project that you'll ultimately perform if awarded a contract pursuant to the RFQ. So when you're evaluated for RFQs, you're evaluated based on your qualifications and technical competence. You're not evaluated based on a specific project. And this is used most often in A&E contracts, as well as consulting contracts. And you will see usually in our A&E RFQs, there will not be a specific cost proposal that will be addressed later as part of the master agreements that are awarded pursuant to the RFQs. Regardless of which procurement type you're responding to, there will almost always be a requirement that you complete an economic disclosure statement or an EDS. And the EDS addresses disclosures of ownership, and it needs to be filled out not only by the actual applicant, but by any legal entity that owns more than a 7.5% interest, whether that be direct or indirect, in the applicant firm. And the economic disclosure statement essentially will tell the city whether the city can do business with a particular corporation. Within it, you not only disclose your ownership structure, you disclose if there were ever debarments within your company, if there were ever any legal actions. So it's a lot of important information for the city to have to know whether a contract can be executed with a particular vendor. So a little earlier, I had mentioned that our Department of Procurement Services is divided primarily into two groups, our contract administration group and our contracting equity group. So everything we've talked about so far really falls into the contract administration side. Now we're going to move into our contracting equity side. So on that side, we deal primarily with certification and compliance. So the first topic we're going to talk about on that end is certification. So in our certification unit, we do have 6 types of certification if you're looking to become a certified firm. MBEs for minority-owned business enterprises, WBEs for women-owned business enterprises, BEPDs for business enterprises owned by people with disabilities, DBEs for disadvantaged business enterprises, ACDBEs for airport concession disadvantaged business enterprises, and finally BBEs for veteran-owned business enterprises. So the city does certify in all 6 of these areas. And the requirements for each of the certification types do vary depending on which particular certification you're applying for, but there are a few basic eligibility requirements that will remain the same regardless of which certification you're applying for. And the basic eligibility requirements include that your business must be at least 51% owned by the applicable group. So if you're applying to be an MBE, you must be at least 51% owned and controlled by a qualifying minority. If you're applying to be a WBE, you need to be at least 51% owned and controlled by women, and so on for each particular certification type. For all certified firms, you must also be a small business and you must be considered to be independent and viable. And for certification, it ends up mattering for a couple different aspects of city business. One, you yourself can become a certified firm, as we've been discussing, but even if you yourself are not eligible to be a certified firm, on almost all city contracts, we do have MBE or WBE goals, and then we sometimes have BBE and DBE goals. So these are all goals that are set by specification. If you look at the individual specification, it will tell you what the goal percentages are. And you'll need, if you do apply for a specification and you're awarded a contract that has goals, you will be expected to meet those goals while you're performing the contract. To have work count towards those goals, the certified firm that you're working to have count towards the goals needs to be performing a commercially useful function. And what that means is a certified firm will be considered to perform a commercially useful function if it is responsible for executing a distinct element of the work of the contract, and that is carried out by actually performing, managing, or supervising the work involved, or fulfilling the responsibilities as a joint venture. And what this definition essentially gets at is to count towards the goals, the certified firm needs to be performing real and meaningful work towards the contract. Otherwise, their work will not be counted towards your ultimate goals. And whatever the goals are for the particular contract, there is always an expectation that you will meet those compliance goals. However, sometimes things do come up in performance of the contract or circumstances change, and contractors believe they are entitled to a reduction or waiver of MBE or WBE goals. If you do think this ever occurs, whether that happens while you're performing the contract or at the time of closeout, you need to make sure that you make a request in writing to the CPO, requesting that reduction or waiver and demonstrating what good faith efforts you made to meet your MBE or WBE goals. If you do not put the request in writing to the CPO, it ultimately won't be considered. But if you do submit it, it will be considered by the CPO. And if she determines that good faith efforts were made to make those goals, to meet the goals during performance of the contract, you'll be contacted about receiving either a reduction or waiver in your MBE or WBE goals. Our contracting equity unit within DPS also does contract monitoring and compliance. And one of the things that's monitored is the actual utilization of MBEs, WBEs, and DBEs as listed in your compliance plan. So in any contract with the city, when you're executing the contract, you'll fill out a compliance plan for how you will reach your MBE or WBE goals. So the thing that's being monitored is that you're actually sticking to that plan. And we also ensure compliance with the Chicago residency ordinance requirements and equal employment opportunity commitments. So for the Chicago residency ordinance, this applies to construction contracts that have an estimated value of $100,000 or more, and for contracts that are funded by city funds only. So what this ordinance does is in the contracts that meet those requirements, 50% of the total work hours must be performed by actual residents of the city of Chicago. And then 7.5% of the total work hours performed must be performed by project area residents. And who is considered a project area resident will vary by contract. But every specification where this ordinance applies will show you a map that indicates what the project area residents, who would qualify as a project area resident for that particular contract. But essentially it will usually be whatever the immediate area surrounding the project is, it will be where project area residents are for that particular project. And then for the equal employment opportunity requirements, this is designed to promote equality of opportunity for minority and female personnel on city-funded construction projects that have an estimated value of $100,000 or more. So in those construction projects, there'll be an award criteria determination into the specification where bidders propose their own percentage goals for utilizing minorities and female employees during the performance of the contract. When you're trying to meet your different MBE, WBE, DBE, or VBE goals, there are a few different ways to achieve compliance. First, if you yourself are a prime contractor who is a certified firm, you can count towards the contract goals. You can also joint venture with an MBE, WBE, or DBE. You can subcontract out work to a particular certified firm, or you can purchase materials that are used to perform the contract from one or more certified firms. While there are a number of different ways to achieve compliance, if you're the prime contractor, you'll be the one who's ultimately responsible for all the reporting requirements. So you'll be the one responsible to submit monthly subcontractor payment certification forms, weekly certified payrolls, and any waivers of lien. Then we also wanted to highlight some of the different programs and bid incentives that the city has that'll help you get the most out of your bid. And in this particular presentation, we'll just go over them at a high level, but if you are interested in learning more about programs and incentives, the city does offer a separate workshop exclusively on programs and bid incentives, and there are prior recordings of that particular program on the DPS YouTube page as well. So the city has a number of programs listed below. The first is the SBI, or Small Business Initiative. This is only available for construction contracts. And in this initiative, only small businesses are able to apply. So if you're a small business, those are a good one to keep an eye out for. You'll see smaller construction projects than some of the city's really large construction projects that are advertised outside of the SBI program. We also have a closely related mid-sized business initiative for construction, and this is just like SBI, except not only are small businesses allowed to apply, but mid-sized businesses can apply as well. Then we have our non-construction MBI program, and this is just for all non-construction contracts. If you see this, only mid-sized businesses or small businesses are able to apply for those particular contracts. Then we have our diversity credit program, and through that program, if you on a private contract, if you use diverse firms where you are not required by law to use those firms, you can earn credit for future city contracts towards MBE or WBE goals. So that can help you, if you're ultimately awarded a city contract, it can help you reach those goals if you are using diverse firms in private contracts where you're not required to do so. Then we have our target market program. And this is only available in non-construction contracts. And if you do see a contract labeled as a target market contract, only MBEs and WBEs can apply for those particular contracts. So those are a really good way, if you are a certified firm, to have an opportunity to get business with the city. Then we have our mentor protege program. In this program, we have mentors select proteges prior to submitting their bid, in which they can teach the protege different skills throughout the contract to help them, the proteges on their way to becoming certified firms, or if the protege is already a certified firm, to help them become closer to an established business by learning additional skills. And our final program is our MBE WBE phased graduation program. And in this program, when an MBE or WBE becomes an established business, they end up having 3 years to be phased out of the program, in which they each year get a reduced amount of participation towards goals. So in the first year of being an established business, any work performed would count towards 75% of the goals. Then it reduces to 50% in the second year and 25% in the third year. So it just helps provide a bridge for MBEs and WBEs when they first become established businesses and therefore too large to qualify as a certified firm. We also have a number of different bid incentives, and you can see those all up on the screen now. The bid incentives available in different specifications will vary by specification, but if you look through the specification, it will always tell you which bid incentives are available. We highly encourage you to look closely at those and make sure that if you qualify for any, you apply for them, because these can really help you be selected as the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Each bid incentive will, for bid evaluation purposes only, reduce the overall bid price you have by a certain percentage, depending on which incentive you apply for. So for instance, if you apply for and receive a bid incentive that's a 2% bid incentive, for bid evaluation purposes only, your bid will be reduced by 2%. However, if you're ultimately awarded that contract, you will still be paid the full amount you bid. Oftentimes in our low bid contracts, the difference between the lowest bidder and the second lowest bidder is very small. So these can really make a difference between you being the lowest or the second lowest bidder. So we always encourage people to look closely at if they qualify for bid incentives, and to always apply for any that you think you qualify for. We also wanted to flag a newer diversity reporting requirement. As of March 2021, there was an executive order issued that requires enhanced diversity reporting. So our contractors are now required to submit projections regarding when and to what extent the contract used certified firms. And if you end up off course from those goals during performance of the contract, you're required to submit an explanation and recovery plan if participation is below the projected usage. We also have a newer requirement that contractors submit annual reports about their business diversity programs. Even if you do not have a business diversity program, you still fill out the annual report. You just report that you do not have such a program. So if you do have a contract with the city and you get email reminders from us about filling out your annual business diversity program reports, please make sure you fill those out and submit those each year to the city. And they will also include information about what you expended on goods and services for MBE and WBE firms in the prior calendar year. And just to close, you probably heard numerous times today me mention the DPS website and different information you can find there. It really is a very good resource if you're looking for any additional information about how to do business with the city. On the website, you can find copies of all of our awarded contracts as well as modification to those contracts, payment information, every weekly bid opportunity. Those will be all be on the DPS website. We have a searchable MBE and WBE directory if you're looking for MBEs and WBEs to meet your compliance goals. We also have additional information about all the bid incentives and programs we touched on today. And we have a link to our iSupplier website or e-procurement website, which is where you will bid on any specification that you're interested in with the city. And with that, if anyone has any questions, we can take those now.
Hi, Courtney, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. I apologize to everyone. At first, I did not have a microphone, and I kept trying to get it on, and it wouldn't come. So it is there now. If you have questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A panel, and we will ask the questions out of the Q&A panel. So feel free to do that. While you're writing up your questions, if you have any, I just want to give you some of the great information that you probably didn't get because I didn't have a microphone to begin with. I wanted to just say if you are looking for the consolidated buying plan, or you would like to get on our e-newsletter, DPS alerts, if you would like to begin getting those things, as Courtney stated in her presentation, feel free to go to our website, chicago.gov/DPS. And there are icons there, the DPS alert icon, the buying plan icon that you can click on, and you're able to download the buying plan, or you're able to fill out the form for the DPS alerts and to get on that. You don't have to, while Courtney is answering any of your questions, if you have any, I am going to send you in the chat area. I'm going to send you those things I just mentioned, along with just saying if you are available and you'd like to network with any of the government contracting folks from the city, state, county, or federal, if you want to be a part of that and network with our partners, feel free to get on to the DPS alert so that you can get information about how to register. You can save the date for February 22nd. It will be at Malcolm X, and I will be getting information out shortly where you can sign up to attend. While I say that, I don't see any questions here. Give me just one extra second. And I'll go ahead and in the chat box. Yes, the question was, will we be sending the presentation? You can find the presentation online. And as I stated before, if you give me just one quick second, I will put the information in the chat area. But you will be able to go online and get a copy of the presentation, and after today, you will be able to find the copy of all of the archive workshops that we have done so far. You can go to youtube.com and then click on youtube.com/Chicago DPS, and click on the DPS playlist for workshops for 2023. All of the information is there, where you can find the PowerPoint, where you can find the recordings of any of our archive workshops, and then where you can find a copy of the latest buying plan. I will say for the buying plan, just keep in mind that the consolidated buying plan comes out quarterly. Our next one will be in January. So please, please, please make sure you're checking that periodically so that you're getting the latest copy of what is forecasted for 15 months. And then last but not least, save the date will be in there as well. Feel free to take any of that information down, copy it, click on the links, whatever you need to do. If you have any questions, we'll take them. If you would like to say anything, Courtney, as a final tip for them, feel free to do so, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, I think just as a final thing, I had mentioned it briefly in the presentation, but if you are putting in any bid submissions, if you have any questions, we just really encourage you to be reaching out to DPS. There's always at least a procurement contact on the specification you can contact. We often hear after bid submission about questions people had, and we're always here and available to help while the solicitations are active to try to make sure that you have all your questions answered and can submit your bids.
Perfect. Well, with that said, I would just say keep up with our DPS alerts. There are some valuable networking opportunities that are in our DPS alerts that we try to get out from our city partners, sister agencies, assist agencies, state partners, county partners, and also um, uh, things that we know that are important out there for the business community. There's a lot of networking opportunities, so feel free to take advantage of those because those are the places where you can go and you can get that um, sort of like a one-on-one attention to whatever your question is or advice of where to go get things and those kinds of things. That's where you will get those things at networking opportunities because that's what we're there for, to tell you where you can find information or resources or tools that are able to help you secure contracting opportunities. So, with that said, I say thank you. If we don't see you before the end of the year, we have 2 more sessions left: how to become certified in procurement fundamentals in December. That concludes our November. And after that December, we will start all over again in January with a whole host of new workshops. So I encourage you as you check out here, go ahead and put any comments down as far as what you'd like to see for programming for next year, because I am looking for that information so I can get that uh, coordinated for you so that we can put those workshops on the calendar. I say thank you. Have a wonderful holiday season if we don't see you. And hopefully, we'll see you again in February for our construction summit, February 22nd at Malcolm X. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, Courtney, and we will talk to you soon.